Good morning, everyone. Good morning here on Wednesday morning, 9 a.m. What a beautiful day it is. Much cooler here in the Western Cape where I live in South Africa. I just want to invite you to come on here today with me and to hear what God has for this year of 2026. I know there's been so much put out there. I've been speaking about this since last year already, because I feel like we've actually started the year last year. And already the Lord has been preparing my heart, and the things that I've been speaking about has definitely been what is in His heart for this coming year. As you listen to this word today, to have the posture and to position yourself with a heart open to God and leaning into Him as you just hear what He has to say for this coming year. And as I said, I've been speaking since last year already. I spoke about how important it is to know your authority in these times and going ahead, going forward. How important it is to know this, and how important it is to know how to perceive, discernment, perceiving with your whole body, with your spiritual senses, and looking and seeing like He does. He wants us to be awake to that. This is not the year for us to be the captain of our own ships, but this is the year of us being consecrated and devoted to God. It's a year for us to be weighty with His presence, to be all the way in, totally in, and for us to have said our goodbyes as we set off, to be these mature Christians with substance, integrity, and as I said, the presence of God. And as I go on this morning, you will see what the Lord showed me, and that is why this is important for this year of 2026. And one of the first things I want to say, and I'm going to come to that later, is last year still, I was somewhere. I think I was waiting in the car for my husband, and I looked, and on the sign there it said New Kings, and immediately the Spirit of the Lord just said to me, this is going to be the year where I raise up new kings. And this is so important for us to understand. So the very first numerical number 26 that I want to share with you this morning is that the very name of God in Hebrew, Yahweh, it's the HYWH, in numerical numbers is the number 26. And so already the sovereignty of God, His divine presence, and His completeness. The number 20 is also that thing of His perfection and completeness. And then His sovereign intervention in our humanity, because the number 6 we know is the number for humanity. In our human affairs, intervention from Yahweh Himself, and the fulfillment of His promises over our lives. So that's the very first thing. And you will remember that I spoke as well a lot last year, especially the second half of the year, about Moses and David. And this is definitely a year as well of David. So much that I'm going to come to now. And this is the year that has to do with these new kings rising up, priests and giants. So, as I said now, Yahweh, the number 26, His sovereign presence, His divine intervention into our humanity, our human affairs, as He comes in and fulfills His promises. But it's more than that. Him showing up in the midst of our humanity. I spoke about this year being God's display of His sovereign, miraculous, supernatural power. He is the one who is going to be saying, look at me. It's like those fireworks that some of us saw over New Year's. And that is the display of God, way more beautiful, incredible, and powerful than that. But it's His time to show off this year. And it's going to be these Kairos moments. And I have spoken about Kairos moments. I'm sure you guys understand the Chronos and Kairos time. The Kairos is God's moments where he comes into our time and he just miraculously comes in and does what he sovereignly wants to do. But I want to ask you, are you ready for those Kairos moments? Are we going to be ready for those moments? The second one I want to highlight to you is that it actually has something to do with Yahweh. But the word wait also has the number 26 in the Hebrew language. And it is about being weighty, almost as walking, if you can imagine. And we are fat and weighty with the presence of God, heavy with his presence. There's something about someone like this. They just stand out. They're different. It is not the same. They're not the same as everyone else. And you know, this is where we can start to just have a look at Moses. And when he had that encounter with God at the burning bush, it was in his normal human affairs. This Kairos moment happened. This moment where sovereign Yahweh came in to his human affairs of shepherding his sheep as everyday, burning bush, normal, everyday thing. But something happened in that place. And where God actually says to him, I am who I am. I am Yahweh. I am 26. And in that space, everything changed for Moses. It shifted and changed it for Moses. And now, we know that he eventually had victory over this demonic Pharaoh. We have to understand that in the Egypt, it isn't those gods, real gods, that were active. And Egypt was full of those gods. There were so many principalities and strongholds. And as I've mentioned before, those are those same ones that are active in this world that we're living in, those ancient principalities. And he overcame this evil king. He overcame the slavery, the head of the snake. And you know what is so amazing? Pharaoh and this evil entity was destroyed in the water of the Red Sea. And I find that interesting. That is a whole teaching by itself. Because this is a year of David. And we all know what the word says, that he was a man after God's own heart. But you know that when you go and look at the actual Hebrew, and this is not, this is actually what it says. There's no word, a man after. That word after is not in the Hebrew language there. It actually says, and I'm going to read this to you. The Hebrew word there is ish kilevavu. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. And it means a man like his heart, God is saying. And this is much deeper than just following orders, being a good person with a good heart. For many years, I actually, when I was younger, thought that I just want to have a good heart like David had. A heart of integrity, you know, because he was such an amazing guy. But it's way more than that. It is, in our inner man, where we make decisions, where it's our will. This place, this is where we have God's heart. Where we have God's heart, literally God's heart that we have in the spirit, a man with a heart like God's. And that is who David was. And his heart led him beyond the letter of the law. David, he was different the way he worshipped God. He did not worship when there were many people looking and watching him. He worshiped when no one was looking, when nothing had changed or happened in his life. And he did it because it was him and God. It wasn't to change his circumstances or to do anything like that. It was about him and God. He was pouring his heart out to God, worshiping him when it was no one else. Pursuing God not for a bigger plan or bigger vision, just because of that intimacy, that relationship with God. He went to fight Goliath. He stood there and he was not intimidated by his taunting. And so I want to say that in this year, there's going to be that taunting spirit that's saying, who do you think you are? What are you doing here? Why are you here? Where is your proper armor? Where is your proper weapons? Why don't you have a sword? And that taunting spirit. And he was not intimidated by that spirit, and he was not silenced either. That taunting spirit did not touch David. He refused to be silenced. And we're going to be in times going forward where we are going to refuse to be silenced. When he stood before him and that taunting was happening, he said to him in 1 Samuel 17, he said, I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, and this day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. This is the sovereign Yahweh, the 26 that I'm talking about. That David knew him. He knew that Yahweh was going to intervene, come into that place sovereignly and slain Goliath. You know that Goliath means to uncover, to reveal, to remove. I'm going to say that again. Goliath means to uncover, to reveal, to remove. And he slayed Goliath not with a man-made sword and all that armor, man-made stuff. He picked up 5 stones from the ground, and that's how he slayed Goliath. We know that. So as I said, this is the year of the new kings, and new means it hasn't been done before. It hasn't existed before. So I'm excited to see who are these kings, these leaders that God is going to raise up in this year as we go forward. It could even be people who have been and that God is wanting to use them as new kings. As I go on, you will see what I mean. Yahweh showing up in our humanity. It has to do with, I know that I've spoken about Deborah. And when Deborah went to war, and Sisera, who was the king then, evil king, he had been fighting the war, and he stumbled onto the tent of Yael. Now, women, I want you to listen to this. I feel emotional this morning. I can feel Holy Spirit on this. Yael was in her normal day, going on with her normal human affairs. And suddenly, there's this man. And she didn't recognize who he was at first. And then she immediately recognized, because he stumbled into her tent, that this is Sisera. And she'd obviously known about what was happening. And in her human affairs, she offered him a glass of goat milk and that he could rest there. And while he was sleeping, she drove that tent peg right through his head. And we know that that number 6 of 2026 in the Hebrew calendar, that 6 represents the tent peg. But to me, that was one of the first things I thought of when I heard that. This tent peg that she drove through this evil king's head. And she conquered not just him, but all that he represented in that time by killing him. Are you ready, women? This is the year that we're going to see women rise up even more. Tent pegs are expanding your territory. We know where he says, open up your tent. Make it wider. Make your tent pegs wider. I love the scripture in Proverbs 21, where he says, the king's heart is like channels of water in the hand of the Lord, and he turns it whichever way he wishes. And this is why I feel this is so important to know that it will be kings who have a heart like God's, because this is how God can channel their hearts so that they will be the leaders in this in times, in these times that we're living in, and we're going into even more to do what God is wanting to do. These are people like David, that when Samuel came to his father's house and looked for him to anoint this king that was going to be king, the new king of Israel, he was going on with his human affairs. It wasn't a special day. There's no lightning or thunder or rainbows or anything like that. The shepherd boy came in and he anointed him. And I think, by the way, took my kids to go and watch the David movie, and I feel like that now even. I was moved so much in that movie. Go and take your kids. It is worth it. And I want to give a shout out to South Africa Noortuk Animation Studios who was part of this movie, and whoever else was, because they portrayed it as it really was. It's not just a little kiddie story, and I could relate to so much of this. And when he came in this Samuel to anoint David and to consecrate him, yes, this young guy, and he had no idea what was happening, but even right there, God consecrated him, set him apart, dedicated him to be devoted to God, but to be king of Israel. And this is the people, the kings and the priests that God is raising up in this time. People consecrated to God, devoted to God, full of courage, full of faith, and not fearing the intimidation and what's going to come. There are going to be just as Goliath's name here means the unveiling, uncovering, there's going to be these Goliaths who are going to be uncovered in this year. We're going to see more and more of that showing itself in the world. And again, I want to say, do you know what to do in that situation? Because you are consecrated to God, devoted to Him for His purposes. In Romans 12, verse 1 to 2, this is one of my favorite chapters in the Bible from a young girl when I was young. I loved Romans 12. I preached on it then already. But this is where it says, present your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I love how it says in other translations, it says, do not imitate the ideals and opinions of the culture around you. And I feel like it's so important, and again, that's like Daniel, who was living this very thing. Or even David, because he did not go according to what they used to do. He worshipped God in this spirit-led way, which was not normal for that day when they had to still go and make sacrifices in the tabernacle. Do not be conformed, but Aramaic actually says here, to this world surrounded by time, this temporal world coming to an end. And I felt to read this because I've spoken about God's time. This is God's time. And we are surrounded by this time, this temporal world we're surrounded with that is coming to an end. And so in this 2026, we're going to see more of that. World systems falling apart, things coming apart. It's not going to be the same. In 2020, I've shared that the Lord gave me a vision, and I saw in this vision many things, but part of it was, but what the Lord said to me in that moment is, your children are not going to recognize the world in the next few years as they've known it. If you've been wondering what's been going on, it is okay. This is God also bringing in, ushering in His kingdom. So these evil demonic kings and systems, they only lead to the nation's idolatry and chaos. And I want to say this because I'm going to come to where I'm going to speak about our authority and why it is so important to know this. Jesus Himself said that my kingdom is not of this world. And you and I are part of this kingdom. And it starts in Genesis 1 again, where God said to them, be fruitful, multiply, and subdue the earth. And I think many of us don't actually even understand what this word means. It means to take dominion, to tread down, to bring under control. It actually means to bring order. And as you're doing that, as you're conquering, as you're taking ground, you're bringing order. And it doesn't mean we now go and just attack and be violent about it. There are definitely going to be those times. But it is stewarding this well, cultivating, nurturing, taking care of, so that it will be restored to its original image in the garden. As I've been saying, Adam and Eve lived in a supernatural realm with God. And we are those people, we are apostolic people who bring in God's order. And so authority is part of who you and I are. His authority in us. And through us, he uses us to do this very thing, to take dominion. There's one of the words related to this means putting your foot on something like a conquered enemy, to that extent. And Jesus said to them in Luke 10, he says, behold, which is that word, can you not see? Do you not see that I give you all authority? What, a little bit of authority? No, all authority to trample on snakes and scorpions, over all the power of the enemies. I have imparted this to you, Jesus said. Can you not see? Do you not know this already? That I have imparted this to you to trample all over the Satan's kingdom, upon every demon, and overcome every power that Satan possesses. I hear people talking about, Tanya, why do you talk about the demonic? Why is it that honestly, in my life, practically, it's just the way God has used me, is that the demonic shows itself. And territorially, especially, we've seen that so much. And so even in our life, when we go through things, it is so important to understand this demonic strategy of the devil and how he operates, and that it's not just talking about little demons hanging around, whispering and sitting on our shoulder. It's so much more than that. These kings who we are, and that's why I mentioned Yael. She's a type of king, because in that moment she slay the enemy, she slay that giant, that evil king. And kings are there to represent God's authority. She did that in that moment. His rulership, and comes with a provision as well. And godly kings represent God, his covenant and his rulership. It doesn't mean the godly kings are not the kings who come with their own agendas and what they want to do, and however they do it, and the power that they have to do it, and they abuse the power and all of that. Those are not godly kings. They bring chaos, where God brings order. His heaven to earth order. As we represent God, we represent his covenant and his rulership. We deliver people from the enemy, because that's what the kings did. And like David, bring religious reformation. I love in Romans 12 where it says, have a reformation of your mind. And we need a reformation in the way we think. That is probably one of our biggest problems. Not problems, I want to say barriers as Christians. Following God's ways, having his heart. That means we're going to have his will. We're going to have that in our hearts. We're going to look at situations and we're going to judge like God would judge, and see, perceiving it, and then walk in his authority, taking dominion. So I want to end up by saying this to you today. Know your authority. Know how to perceive. This year, be courageous and be strong. as you are devoted to God and you are all the way in. There is no room for halfway in coming into this year. And as we have the heart like David, we will not be intimidated and we will not be silenced in this year. Remnant, hear me this day. Watchmen on the wall, prophets, hear me this day. This is what the Lord is saying. To take dominion, to walk in his authority and rule like he does. Bring in his reformation. I just want to say that as we see these things unraveling in the earth, as we see demonic structures coming down, things changing very quickly, even more than we saw the last few years, we're going to be seeing strange things happening from this year onwards, even more strange. It's so exciting because this is the kingdom of God that we are a part of. And to not be afraid, to overcome fear, to raise your shield of faith. And so I bless you today, and I will see you next week.